We'll just have to catch up on the incredible announcements that I have here for you. So they'll be missing them, but I wanted to welcome everybody to our Zoom monthly Siska meeting tonight. And we have expanded our Zoom account capacity so we can certainly accommodate more than 100 people. Let's just put it that way. So there's no problem. It's been asked of me, could other people join in? And we're very welcoming of other people. And if there's anybody like that here, I just admit everybody who shows up. Go right ahead and invite a friend if you want. And I thought maybe tonight's presentation, which is particularly interesting to people who are on the coast here, might be of interest to others. So if there's anybody like that who's not a member of Siska, you're most welcome. And of course, everybody who is, glad to see you and glad you could make it. I'll just be distracted here for a minute while we admit a few more people. But I wanted to make a few announcements, or at least prompt others to make announcements, so that we could get some information out, as well as through our emails and monthly newsletter, just to keep you abreast of what's going on. So where's Debbie? She's here someplace. Debbie, do you want to talk about kayak friendly?
Sure. So just to let you know, the kayak friendly website is up and running, and we have 77 lodgings that are listed, and wanted to just let people know that if you know of a great place to stay that doesn't involve camping, please let us know if we've missed it on the map. And if you'd like to write a blog, that would be great too.
You want to just say what the kayak friendly website is?
Well, kayak friendly lodging is places around the Salish Sea and Vancouver Island that you can paddle up to, basically, or paddle away from, and stay with a roof over your head. Norm and Beth were the masterminds. They started that a couple of years ago, and it's been expanded now, and Tony's done a good job on the website. So I think just go have a look, see if there's some places that you think we need to add, and let us know if you want to tell us some stories.
People with bad hair days today.
Yeah.
So Deb, where do they find it? How do they get there?
Kayakfriendly.ca.
Did you just say that?
Kayakfriendly.com, kayakfriendly. Just Google it. You should be able to find it. It's also on the Siska website.
Right.
Under links, useful links.
BC Marine Trails is also linked it to their website.
Thank
and
you.
that's Gail's picture on the cover.
Oh, cool.
Okay, very good. If you want to pipe in and say something, please go ahead. If you're not, you might want to mute your microphone so we can't hear your dinner cooking and kind of get all hungry here. A couple of other things that I'll just mention. You probably know, because I've been messaging people probably endlessly about the spring training, that it is underway. We had a number of workshops take place already and more coming up this weekend. So if you haven't signed up, there are still a few spaces available. You're welcome to join. Also, I know that our club paddles have been very well attended. A lot of people are interested in them, and we're doing our very best, thanks to Gary and his many paddle leader volunteers in Siska, to try to have more pods going out. By the way, we are sticking with 6 in our pods. I know that some people felt that when Dr. Henry mentioned we could have 10 people outside, they're like, whoa, there we go, we're back up to 10.
I need an iPod stand.
They're supposed to be the same 10.
I need an iPod stand.
So I'm just gonna try to, no, I guess I can't do it there. Anyway, so if we can just continue with our 6, and we'll have multiple pods, we should be able to accommodate lots of people in our paddles that way. And then I also wanted to say that there have been a number of club workshops operated by our very, very hardworking and able Siska volunteer instructors, either in the pool where clinics have been going on at one end, small group, and the other open practice, and also on the ocean, different things like currents and so on. And is Jenny Sutton online somewhere? Jenny?
I am.
Okay, Jenny, did you want to say something about courses?
Yeah. So we've got a lot of enthusiastic instructors in the club that are keen to volunteer their time. So if you or you know of anybody in the club who's interested in doing a Paddle Canada basic 1-day course or Paddle Canada level 1 2-day course, can you email me? My contact is on the website. And I never remember what it is because it's, yeah. Anyway, it's just about that. We have been running towing clinics, edging and bracing clinics, lots of current clinics. And now we'd like to start running some Paddle Canada courses. If I need to know if there's an interest before we start committing volunteer instructors. And it will be in the newsletter, the announcement. That's it from me.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Jenny. I'll just mention that, and I see Deborah and Roger are on somewhere above planet Earth there, that we're still looking for somebody to take Deborah's place. I realize these are large shoes to fill. No offense, Deborah, but she's been a great welcome. So if you know of somebody who just loves to welcome people, as Deborah does, make them feel welcome, please point them in her direction or my direction, because she'd like to retire, take some time off, and we need to replace her in that role for the club. And basically she can give you, whoever's interested, a quick course in it. It's not very complicated, but it is very important. So, and then there was, I got a note from Deborah just before the meeting started. So I'll mention something about it, but I'll give you a heads up here, Deb. we're not gonna do a sort of a group howl, but just to say, if those of you, any of you online are very keen on Takaya the wolf, and I think we all had great respect for that animal and the people who supported it, Cheryl Alexander has proposed that at sunset tonight, you go outside and howl as a show of support for Takaya, who died 1 year ago today, hunted down somewhere on the West Coast. So there you go. And I just will quote here from Deborah's note that howl for all the wild creatures needlessly killed by humans, and participate by howling at sunset. So apparently it's on Facebook, and we're just passing that along, but please don't howl on our line here, because it will definitely disturb our presentation, which we're giving more priority to right now than that.
Alan, could I make a suggestion to you or Deborah?
Yep.
For that greeter role, how does somebody find out what's involved without putting their hand up or contacting Deborah? Is there something online, or is it in the newsletter? Just what's involved?
Yeah,
Or
there was something sent out in the newsletter, and we've talked about it before, but Deborah, do you want to just say a couple of things?
Yeah, it's just basically whenever there's a new member, Dave O sends me the information of who's the new member, and I send out a letter welcoming them to the club. And this letter details just about everything anybody would ever want to know about the club, and then some. It goes on for quite a few paragraphs and pages telling everything we do. So yeah, it's pretty automatic, a welcome, and then inserting their name in the appropriate places. And that's all it is, just keeping track of the names.
Yeah, it's a form letter.
It's a form letter, more or less.
Right.
Personalized.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. Now, those were the only notes I got, but let me just ask quickly, anybody who's got responsible for a role in our club who's online, do you have any announcements that you want to put out there while we have the attention of 60 or so of our members?
Sure, it's Lisa, and I'll just say that we have upcoming on Monday, the 29th, we have a Zoom session on the journey to multi-day tripping. And on April the 12th, we're going to be running Lynn's kayak packing trips. So there will be something in the April newsletter about Lynn's, and we've already sent out something about the Journey to Multi-Day Tripping. I'll probably ask Joe to send another one in another couple of days, but those are coming up.
Very
And
good.
Alan, I could add to that that Edgar and I are going to be doing one and planning a day paddle, and I think the date is April 6th, and I think 8 of the 9 spots are already taken.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds like you might have to do that again, Jen. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, just one more call. Anybody else have an announcement? No, okay, hearing none. So I'm going to, let's see if I can remember how to do this. I'll just mute everybody in case somebody isn't, and then I will unmute our presenter, Josh, so he can talk to us. Oh dear, now I have to find him. Actually, Josh, you can unmute yourself. How would that be? And while he's doing that, I will make just a brief introduction, because I did get a chance to talk to Josh. We did a little bit of test a couple of days ago online, and so I spent a little bit of time with him. I don't know him well, but I'm sure looking forward to his presentation. So the ecology of transient, also called Bigg's killer whales. I'm sure he'll explain the terminology there. Josh McInnes, he's a marine ecologist and a master's student at the University of BC's Institute for Oceans and Fisheries Marine Mammal Research Unit. He grew up on Vancouver Island here, but Josh has been studying these whales up the coast on the north and down the coast to the south. He was explaining how he'd spent a few years watching and looking and researching these whales off Monterey, as well as up our north coast. And I thought, how do people get jobs like this? I mean, honestly, really, that's fantastic. Who wouldn't like to have a job like that? He's become, of course, and probably was to begin with, very passionate about killer whales. And I think all of us, everybody who's been on the water and had any kind of an experience with a whale, and particularly the killer whales, I think you are touched a little bit, by their majesty, by their power. And I related to Josh a little story, and I'll mention it just in passing, because I'm sure you all have your stories. And Rob will remember this, and I think David's online. We were paddling through Hakai Passage on our way north on a trip. I can't remember if we were going to Alaska or where, and we were going fast, and the weather was coming in, and it was choppy water. We were really focusing on, and suddenly this thing went by like a freight train, and it was a huge transient, like big, huge, sort of a dorsal fin coming, and he was motoring. He didn't come that close to us, but he came close enough that we could see him very well as he was kind of partly breaking the surface. And it just gives you pause. It just helps you to realize how much in control of this environment these animals are, and how we're not, basically, and that we're kind of visitors in this environment. So the more we know about marine mammals, and killer whales really figure very prominently for me among the marine mammals, the better it is. Hopefully we can encourage them to grow and prosper. And Josh is, I think, quite a key person in that. He'll explain how long he's been doing this, and it's very impressive, the work that's been going on. So without further ado, I will introduce somewhere in the middle of your screen there, Josh McInnes. Take it away, Josh.
Hello, I can share a screen here with everyone. Let's see here. There we go. Let's see here. Can you guys all see that? All right. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for the introduction, Alan. Yeah, my name is Josh McInnes. I am very excited to talk to you guys tonight. This is a topic I am very passionate about, especially with a lot of the interest in killer whales these days. Most of you have probably heard in the news at some point regarding about the resident population the southern residents in particular that are endangered. And a lot of, well, with transients, we're starting to see is more use of the area, especially in the Salish Sea. So especially if you're out on your kayaks and you're spending some time, there's a good chance you're going to be able to see a group of transients these days compared to say 10 to 20 years ago, which, you know, we transients were quite rare, hence the name transient. Let's see here. Oh, for some reason it's not wanting to change. Huh. There we go. So as Alan was saying, I'm a master's student at the University of British Columbia's Marine Mammal Research Unit, as well as an associate with the Pacific Wildlife Foundation, which is in Vancouver, or Burnaby, British Columbia. And we're currently doing, there's a few different studies on transients that are happening right now. Mine is one of about 3 different master's students or PhDs that are really focusing on transients because we're starting to really see some interesting trends in the population. And they're one of the more rare, rarely studied animals. We don't know as much about the transients as we do, say, the residents or the offshores, or the resident orcas. And then then there's the offshores, which we don't know. We particularly don't know enough about them either, which I'll explain a little bit about. I got to thank a lot of our partners that a lot of the research we've done over the years. In particular, we collaborate with a lot of NOAA fisheries, especially Southwest Fisheries Science Center in La Jolla, California. And we work a lot under government permits within national marine sanctuaries. So we're very happy to have a lot of people that have helped support the research through funding and through any aspect that they can, in their capacity, can help us with, especially partner organizations that are also researchers. So how I started in my field is it was a kind of a weird situation. I was very lucky, and in a way, as I grew up on North Vancouver Island, Port McNeill. So I get to go out and look at orcas quite a bit, but it wasn't until my passion for transients really came on a fateful day. Now, this is a terrible photograph, and I did not take it, but it's a terrible photograph, but it really kind of brought home how I become passionate about transients. I was fishing in Port Hardy, BC. So if you've been up to Port Hardy, it's so spectacular scuba diving, and I'm sure kayaking up in that area is pretty fantastic too. And we were fishing off the dock. I was about 12 years of age when we saw a group of Pacific white-sided dolphins, which are these very commonly sighted up on the North Island and off the outer coast. A small 12-foot dolphin that often is in large schools. Well, there was a small group of them basically came swimming rapidly into Port Hardy Harbor, and following it were a group of transients. And they came within probably about 15 feet of the dock we were fishing off of. And then the dolphin disappeared, the killer whales disappeared. And at one moment we kind of sat there just waiting to see what would happen. And by that time there was numerous people along the walkway watching. There was camera crews, whale watching company was out on the water taking photos, and the harbor just exploded. And this poor image here, you can kind of see the water that it's erupting around it, but a dolphin was thrown through the air by a transient. And at the time, I didn't know who the whales were personally. I didn't know the identifications or who these animals were. And the dolphin ended up dying and stranded itself on a beach nearby. About 3 weeks later, I was invited from my elementary school with some fellow high school students to do the necropsy, which is an animal autopsy. And we were able to figure out, different things about the animal. And since then, I was pretty much hooked. And I spent every waking moment looking for transients. I joined a whale watching company for numerous years and just started collecting notes until I was in my late teens before I went into university. Now, for a while, I started working with nonprofit organizations. I ran a group of myself and about 5 other behavioral ecology students from the University of Victoria. We were all taking a class in behavioral ecology, and we all had these really interesting questions, and we'd meet up after class and talk about transients and some of the ideas that from the lectures that we had that day. And we decided to form our own group off of Victoria called the Transient Killer Whale Research Project, which went on for 10 years. And it ended up growing very large to the point where we had a sponsor working. You can see the bottom boat there. If you've ever been up and down the coast, you might have seen the David B. She's a tour boat. We made collaborations with this lovely couple that run this company, and we were able to go to Southeast Alaska, multiple times a year to look for transients in very remote places, as well as down to Monterey, California, which I'll explain a little bit about, as most of my work now is in California. You can see remote areas. This is Southeast Alaska here. This is up in Endicott Arm, and this is near Dawes Glacier. It's a very spectacular place, but this is just, how amazing it is that we get to live in such a beautiful area, the Pacific Northwest between Washington and Southeast Alaska, the Pacific Panhandle, such an amazing spot. So I won't go too much into the different ecotypes because I did create quite a large lecture, so I can cover as much as I can about the general ecology about transient orcas. But on our coast in the northeastern Pacific, there's 3 ecotypes. And the term ecotype really just means scientists don't really know where to put them. They're part of Orcinus orca, which is the species name. Killer whale or orca is all one species globally. Killer whales are found throughout the world's oceans. And there's only one species, but globally there's 10 different ecotypes, and in the northeastern Pacific, 3 of these ecotypes have been particularly the focus of most studies. And you can see here the residents, transients, and offshores. And the first thing you can notice is that if you're out kayaking, for instance, you could pick up subtle clues in the differences. The chances of seeing the southern residents while kayaking or the transients are pretty good. The offshores, though, were only discovered in the late 1980s, and they were first discovered of Haida, Kauai, and they were quite a bit in open water, and they are also been sighted off Western Vancouver Island. We now know that they're a different population or ecotype that frequents offshore habitats near the continental shelf. The resident orcas here, as you can see, are most commonly sighted animals, and you can see that rounded dorsal fin. So if you're out looking to try to identify killer whales, the first thing to look for is the group size. So with residents, it's often between 6 and 25 whales or more. You're likely seeing a resident group. Also, you can look here at the saddle patch, this gray area right along the base of the dorsal fin is sometimes what we call an open saddle, and that's where black pigments kind of enter into the saddle patch. Also, resident killer whales typically have rounded dorsal fins. And then in the transients have these big, large gray saddle patches, and the saddle patch is often a lot larger than the other ecotypes. And then often a very shark-like pointed dorsal fins, especially in adult females. This is a photograph of the different teeth from the different ecotypes we have on the coast here. So you can kind of start to see a little bit of the differences. Now, the major thing with the ecology of killer whales is their diet. The diet really shapes everything about their natural history. If you look at transients, particularly mammal hunters, for the most part, they feed only on marine mammals, but we occasionally see them tackle coastal birds or marine birds, and in some locations along the coast, squid has actually been found in their diet as well, particularly farther north in the Gulf of Alaska. The resident orcas are fish eaters. They're mostly Chinook salmon specialists. They're one of the major reasons that relationship between the Chinook salmon, which is also critically endangered, and the southern residents are also critically endangered, that ties in, as well as a few other environmental factors that are causing their decline. The offshores, though, is the most interesting tooth is that they're primarily shark eaters. So they tackle Pacific sleeper sharks, blue sharks, also tuna, though, and their gums, often the teeth are right worn down to the gums, and that's often due to the fact that sharks have very sandpaper-like skin, and those teeth often get worn down. But basically, other than that, though, we don't know a lot about offshore orcas. That they live in the outer coast, off the outer continental shelf, in large family groups, sometimes up to 60 to 100 whales. But other than that, though, a lot hasn't been studied. Morphology. So as Alan was mentioning, you likely saw a large adult male. Adult males are about twice the size of a female in weight. So a female can be about 8,000 pounds. Males can be up to 15 to 17,000 pounds. And males often go through a growth spurt around the age of about 13 to 15 years, where they develop this large dorsal fin that can be up to about 6 feet or about 2.2 meters. And then they develop these large paddle-like flippers too as well. And females often, the dorsal fin's about 0.3 meters or around 3 feet long, their dorsal fin. So, but it's a sexual characteristic, a sexual dimorphic characteristic that we see between males and females. The other thing is we often sometimes see different morph colorations, which I'll talk about in a minute. We see the black and white morph, but then we also see a white color morph that can either be an albino or leucistic animal. When you're out looking, this is kind of a neat little, these are some of the different behaviors you might see with killer whales, particularly the dive sequences. Is very much a straight up blow. It's kind of misty, often followed by a dark dorsal fin. The killer whales don't often lift their flukes like humpback whales do or gray whales. Also, other things is like spy hopping. They do that to look around, to look at their surroundings, especially for transients. If they're looking for seals that are hauled out on land or on rocks at reefs. You can see breaches too as well. And then some of the hunting behaviors, we call it catapulting, when they chuck a seal through the air. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. We also see them in some parts of the range hunting gray whale calves and dolphins. This is porpoising behavior here, where they're high-speed swimming after a porpoise. So the natural history of transient Bigg's killer whales. Where did it all begin? How do we know the difference between transients and residents and offshores? Well, it was one individual in the 1970s that was Dr. Michael Bigg. He was a professor at the University of British Columbia, and he was also at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans at the Pacific Biological Station in Nanaimo. In the 1960s, between the late 1960s, between 1964 and 1976, there was a major capture industry or fisheries for killer whales in British Columbia. Now, if you're from Victoria, you've spent a lot of time in Victoria, you probably remember Sealand of the Pacific, different areas that actually had killer whales. And at that time, killer whales were taken out of the waters for ocean area pretty much around the world. And that brought a lot of concern to the federal government of Canada and the United States. And they were both concerned that the rate at killer whales were being taken out of the water wasn't sustainable. So they needed a population census. And at the time, Michael Bigg was tasked with trying to figure this out. And fishermen were saying there were hundreds of killer whales, even thousands that they would see up and down the inside passageway. Michael Bigg sent out questionnaires that gave a rough estimate. So basically, they'd send a questionnaire out once or twice in the year. Individuals like lighthouse keepers, kayakers like yourself, or fishermen would fill out this questionnaire in at least 2 days of the year. And the reason why they chose 2 days of the year is to make sure there was no duplicate sightings. So that gave a rough estimate of around 200 to 300 killer whales, way less than the hundreds into the thousands that fishermen were saying. So it was critical that they figured out the exact population and then put management practices into protecting them. In order to do that, they came up with a way of photo identifying the whales. Michael Bigg noticed, and his colleagues noticed, that killer whales had these congenital features on the dorsal fin and saddle patches that were unique to each animal. This could be a scar, this could be a blemish or a notch or some sort of tissue loss in the dorsal fin that stayed with that animal its entire life. And he was criticized by other researchers, but he prevailed. Unfortunately, Mike Bigg passed away in 1990, but his research and legacy still lives with the numerous census work that has been going on since then, over 40 years now, by colleagues at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And that technique of photo identification now is global. It's around the world with killer whale populations, not just killer whales, though. We use it for other dolphin species, humpback whales. So we're very lucky to have that. His history too, that Michael Bigg, where we now got the name Bigg's killer whales for transients. Michael Bigg was the first person to actually figure out that transients and residents were different kinds of killer whales, different races. Initially, transients were thought to be little outcast groups of the larger resident killer whales, but it was soon found, and that they would sporadically go throughout the range between Southeast Alaska and British Columbia and Washington. And the residents were very residential. They spent their times in predictable areas in the straits where salmon congregate. Now, the first transient group that was really kind of the focus of the studies was the T2 matrilineal group. And I wanted to share an example of this because, especially during the captive era in British Columbia, especially off southern Vancouver Island, the Sealand of the Pacific with Oak Bay Marine Group, the first transient group to be really captured was the T2s, the matrilineal group here. And you can see with the white individual here was named Chimo, who was at actually Sealand of the Pacific for some time. So in March 1970, this was just at the time when they were discovering the difference between transients and residents. They had captured the T2s in Pedder Bay Marina. And this group was held there for almost 80 days. One animal passed away, very malnourished. They were trying to feed it fish. They were trying to feed the entire group fish, but they didn't realize at the time that transients were mammal hunters. They ate seals. And one animal actually malnourished and passed away. The other animals, though, fasted for some time. The white whale, though, Chimo, was pretty unique. You can see Chimo here was actually the ID numbers T4 and its mother T3 side by side. Chimo had a unique disease that no one knew about. And when captured by Sealand of the Pacific, Jacques Cousteau flew to Victoria. There was numerous people wanted to study this whale because a white killer whale was so rare to see. Even Marine Land of the Pacific in Los Angeles offered $1 million for the whale, but the owner of Sealand of the Pacific at that time, Bob Wright at the Oak Bay Marine Group, said no, she's a Canadian whale, she's going to stay in Canada. Unfortunately, though, this whale had a unique genetic disease called Chichiak-High-Sac syndrome, which is an albinism. It's partial albinism. It actually affects humans. It affects mice, deer, minks, several species, and it causes an impaired immune system. And in killer whales, they believed an impaired echolocation system, which was when they capture this whale. This is them transporting it here to Oak Bay. This is one of those things, and she died quite soon after being captured. It was within months she died from pneumonia, and it was just from this being susceptible to infection from this disease. The T2s, though, were released. 2 individuals were actually freed in the middle of the night, and one of them was T1. His name was Charlie Chin. Now, the group was really interesting. They all had these really weird genetic abnormalities or recessive disorders, they believe. Charlie Chin had an abnormal underbite. Another female had tumors around her jaw. This group had a lot of deformities, and the T2s, when they were released, the lead matrilineal female, which I'll talk about what a matrilineal group is it's a leader of a group that's usually a female, and this is present in societies of elephants and some primate societies, but also in killer whales, is T2. She and her main son, who you can see here at the chopped up fin, T1, were freed by some individuals in the middle of the night. They don't know who did it, and because they were sold for half price to an aquaria, and they ended up surviving. She had an offspring named T2A, which I'll explain the number system and how we name killer whales in a minute. T2A, but both T1 and T2A both passed away. That she had a daughter, though, and now the matriline is still here. We still see this, and so I'll explain kind of the naming system here with transients. So when Michael Bigg was doing his research, initially they were calling whales like J-pod, like you can remember J37 or J25 or J27 or these numbers. So when a whale is identified, they give a letter to that group. For instance, in the residence, it's J-pod, K-pod, and L-pod. And then each whale that's unique is uniquely given a number. So J27 or J2, if you remember Granny and the population of the residents. And then, but in transients, it didn't really work out too well because the transient system was a lot different. In resident killer whales, the females, which are the matriarchs, and their offspring stay together their entire lives. Even the males don't disperse from the matrilineal group. So this is quite unique. So you have multiple generations within one pod. But in transients, it's very fluid. You still have the matrilineal systems. You can see T2C here. In our offspring, but often the group size is smaller in transients. We have groups of 5 to 10 animals in one group, and individuals will disperse sometimes from the natal group and go off and mingle with other transient groups for extended periods of time. Now, as I mentioned, the diet of killer whales is so key in their whole natural history. This includes their social system, and you can see here she ended up having a couple different offspring. So instead of giving, say, JK L or A, B, C for the residents, there's so many transient groups that the alphabet would get exhausted. So they gave them all the number T for transient, followed by the number 2. So T2 would be the first female in that transient group. And then her offspring would be T2A, and then B, and then C. And if T2C had offspring, so you can see here T2C is the third offspring of T2, her offspring would be T2C1, T2C2, T2C3, and T2C4. So it actually works quite well for the social structure that is so fluid for transients. T2C2 actually had an offspring. So that remember I mentioned that that match aligned with that recessive disorder. It seems like there's a lot of issues in this group. Well, T2C2, who passed away last year, also was a member that had scoliosis of the spine, which was a unique disorder. You can kind of see here if it's playing for you there. You can see the scoliosis is quite present. It's warped his complete spine, and transients are cooperative hunters, and we were always so fascinated by the T2s in the fact that when he was hunting, he had a difficult time keeping up with his mother and the rest of the group when they were hunting a seal or a porpoise or a dolphin. So they often helped him. He couldn't swim as fast, so he would lag behind, even up to a kilometer behind the rest of the pod. And after they'd made a kill or kill a seal or a sea lion, they would come back to him with the prey and they would share the food. So very cooperative. I'll explain a little bit more of that cooperative nature in transients. But what do we now know? And this is constantly changing. The research I'm working on right now with the Pacific Wildlife Foundation and UBC, we're constantly learning new things about killer whales. One of the major changes we're noticing is that there isn't just one transient population. There's several. And you can see here along the west, so if you look between Southeast Alaska down the coast of Southern California, we have what's called the West Coast transient population. Now, this is a population that frequents the inland waters. You could find them anywhere. You likely see them out here. And then overlapping with them, though, is the Gulf of Alaska population. And they don't interbreed. They've only ever been sighted once in association, and that was in Southeast Alaska. They're genetically different. They don't share the same genes, and they're also acoustically different. They don't have the same dialect. And the dialect is basically the vocalizations, the certain types of calls. It's an accent, if you will, with each different group. So they can kind of tell each other apart. This little purple blob or blue blob here in the corner is what I call in Prince William Sound and the Kenai Fjords is the AT1 population or the Chugach transients. Currently, they're going extinct. There's only 7 left. And when first discovered in 1984, they numbered 22 whales. Then the Exxon Valdez oil spill actually ended up killing off 13 of them within a few months. They had swam through the oil, and then they started to decline precipitously between the years. And now the 7 have still been identified, but the female is the lead matriarch of one group there. She's post-reproductive. So with killer whales, just a little bit about their reproduction. As I mentioned, they're very similar to humans. They can live to 80, 90 years. Females can. Males, an average, females are around 50 to 60 years. Well, males on average about 30, but males can also live to about 50 or 60. Females have about 5 calves in their lifetime in the first 25 years of being reproductive, which is around the age of 11. They can start having their first calves, and they have about 5 calves in their lifetime. They spend a lot of time raising them, and then after that they go into menopause like humans, and then they end up being grandmothers, and they end up what we call alloparenting, where they'll actually take over and help as matriarchs and care for offspring in the pod. And they're one of the animals similar to pilot whales, which are another species that have this matriarchal society that live past reproductive age, and they help guide, and killer whales are a very cultural species where they pass down traditions of foraging and hunting. And quickly, last thing here, which is most of the research I'm doing, is a study on the California, or what we're calling now the Outer Coast transients, which is a group that are what we believe to be part of the West Coast transient population, but it's a little confusing. And I'll explain a little bit about that in the next couple of slides here. Oh, the next slide. Here we go. So what we're talking with the West Coast transient population is that possibly it is not just one population, but split into several or 3 different assemblages that are intermixed briefly up and down the coast, but they also have very different ranges. And this is a lot of the work that I'm currently collaborating with the Southwest Fisheries Science Center, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, And we're currently tracking this. We actually just did a minimum population count, which we're publishing right now as a government report. Was accepted actually about 4 days ago. So we're very excited. We've cataloged what we call the outer coast transients here. So we have a coastal group of transients here, like the T2s that I mentioned, that often are in the inlets and in the straits, and they're often hunting around haul out sites where harbor seals are. They're specialists of harbor seals. Then we have what we call the outer coast transients here, which are kind of a new group that we're kind of starting to get to know. They live on the out near the continental shelf, near the break, often in deep water areas, and a lot of the occurrence is usually in California. So this is where I spent about the last 5 years studying is this assemblage. And now we're actually starting to briefly see another group, which we have not connected through association to any of the other transients. And that's the thing, transients don't interbreed with residents or other ecotypes. So we can confirm when we see a new killer whale associated with a known transient that animal is transient, because over the 30 or 40 years that killer whale research has happened in British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest, we have never seen breeding or interactions between these different killer whale ecotypes. So we're now seeing these ones we're calling the oceanics, and all our sightings have happened close to 100 to 200 kilometers offshore. But from what we've gathered from the NOAA surveys and the research from our colleagues is that they've been identified hunting marine mammals, but we don't know more than that. And they may be their own ecotype, an oceanic form that we're just not sure if they're even transient yet. So this is kind of exciting for us right now. So movement patterns with transients, as I mentioned, being called transient, they are very much sporadic. They move throughout the coast. The T124s are another family natural line that we know quite well. You can see here is a 1 year distribution of movements and encounters we had with them. And one of the interesting things about one of the encounters with this pod is I had tracked them over this year is that we had watched them. I was up in Southeast Alaska up in Endicott Arm, and we had encountered the group. And then 2 weeks later, I encountered them off San Juan Island. So they can cover 100 kilometers a day. So if you could try to kayak as fast as them, but I guarantee you're not going to catch up. They move quickly. They don't linger in one location for long, and I'll explain a little bit about why that is and why these movements are so important, these transient movements.
Josh, I don't want to disturb your flow, but a couple of questions have come up on the chat here. Do you want to handle them at the end, or do you want to stop? Or
it's up to you. I do have a lot of information to go through, but I'm happy if you have time, if people want. I don't mind at all being to answer questions at all.
Okay, well, one was about do these whales have names like T2C2 or something? Would that have a name as well as a number, or?
Yeah, so sometimes they're given names, you know, like the residents, like Granny or Ruffles with the residents. So T2C2 was Tumbo. So often they're given names to locations in the region. So there's an animal named Rainy, T11A, who is actually one of my all-time favorite killer whales. And Rainy is after a bay up in the west coast of Vancouver Island near Tofino, Rainy Bay, Tumbo Island. So, you know, they were given local names to theirs, right, or First Nation names usually too.
Okay, and another question was, do these whale groups, the different groups, do they compete with each other, fight with each other, or are they cooperative, or?
So that's a very good question. So there has never been, like between the ecotypes, residents, transients, and offshores, we've never seen any interactions other than the transients often try to avoid the residents. There was one encounter in 1987, I'm pretty sure it was. It might have been in the 90s, but it was a group of transients that were actually literally chased. It was off of the Nanaimo, in between the Nanaimo and Gabriel Island, where a group of transients were chased by J-pod, southern residents. And there was a lot of vocalizations, and when the transients, they were intermixing with the residents, residents were almost herding them towards shore. Now, why would you think that a transient group would be afraid of a resident group? Well, transients live in small groups, right? 5 to 10 animals, as I mentioned, small pods, small match lines, compared to the residents, which, as I said, with the groups of up to 25. The residents at the time, it was a TFO scientist that witnessed it, saw the interactions of one transient surface with blood running it down. It actually had been the residents had been raking the transients and trying to herd them towards shore. Unfortunately, one of the BC ferries kind of pulled out and actually interrupted the situation. But that's the only time it's ever been witnessed. But we do know from when we do see transients and residents in close association, they avoid each other. The transients often avoid the residents. And as I'll talk a little bit about the reason how they do that is often transients remain silent. And I'll talk about that in the foraging area section of this, but where residents are very vocal and transients can hear residents coming from a mile away. And often what we'll see is the transients veer and move out of the area when the residents come through.
Okay, thanks. We'll let you go ahead then, Josh. I don't want to disturb your flow.
Oh, no, that's great. Those are really great questions. So the social organization, as I mentioned, is that matrilineal system. And I can talk a little bit about the squabbles and that. We don't see a lot of squabbles between within intra squabbles between inside the population or family groups with transients. It's very much a cooperative society. And I think a lot of that has to do with the matrilineal system. I think the females keep the males in check. And especially we see in the resident killer whales, one of the ways that residents can deal with the testosterone that males have, which in animal society is probably one of the major reasons why in mammals, males are pushed out of the group, is due to the fact that testosterone and having new calves in the group could lead to incidents of injury or infanticide. Usually that happens with males from outside, but in one case is inbreeding too as well. That's one reason why also killer whales mate with other groups, not their own. But the other thing is that males often form little social groups by themselves. And that's usually a lot of roughhousing happens when these males get together, even with young male calves. They form these male social groups. And during that period, they end up, burning off their steam of being males and that testosterone driven animal. And also the fact that I think the females are these matriarchs, they really kind of handle the group. So this you can see here is a family of outer coast transients. We call it the gray whale killers, the gray killers that we see in Monterey seasonally. And they are quite an extended family now. We know a little bit about the lead female. Her name is Emma. She's got the two little, like an M scar in her dorsal fin. They're one of the most commonly cited outer coast transients groups that we've been able to study down there. So our research the last few years is quite interesting. And when I joined on with the University of British Columbia and the Pacific Wildlife Foundation, I've been really trying to figure out how many assemblages are within the West Coast transient population. What are the trends? What are we seeing? And why are there so many? And because initially, right now at this moment, the West Coast transient population is one community. In 2006, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans tried to create a recovery plan. As the resident orcas are endangered, the transients are threatened. So this recovery plan was created and adopted. But in the process, they did not take into account killer whales in the outer coast assemblage or south of Washington State, off of California or Oregon. So I'm very interested now in trying to define these populations or communities and trying to figure out conservation measures for the entire Pacific coast, especially if we're considering them one population or if there's several. But the first step is actually trying to figure that out. So this is some of the data that we kind of started to look at. We collected 3,835 sightings. So individuals, that's from sightings that we have, people from social media, Facebook, emails coming in from kayakers that are out, or fishermen, or anyone that's out on the water can send us a sighting or a photograph, and we collect this information. And we're really looking, but right now our data is kind of moving off into Southeast Alaska as well. But you can see, and this is a lot to do with observer effort, which is, a lot of whale watching companies. There's a lot of traffic in the coastal waters here, but there's also a lot down here too in Monterey, California. You can see the different colors of the different assemblages of killer whales that we're seeing. So the red is the coastal transient killer whales, the ones that like the T2s or the T11s. The OCTs or the outer coast transient, these blue animals that occasionally make their way up into the Salish Sea through usually in Juan de Fuca Strait. And when in association, though, when they're here, they're usually in association with the coastal transients. But for the most part, we see them down here. So there's not a lot of overlap. So trying to figure out the protective measures for these killer whales is not easy, especially when it's transboundary between Canada and the United States. And we sometimes get the Alaska transients that make their way down here. So this was quite an initiative that we spent the last 5 years really trying to develop and trying to figure out, using multiple lines of evidence to try to figure out if there's more than one assemblage of transients. So we'll start with the coastal transients. This is kind of that map zoomed in. We have 2,799 sightings / encounters with the coastal transient killer whales. So if you're interested in contributing, if you're on the water, you can always send us an email. I can provide that later. And if you see a killer whale, this really helps us track where the movements are, where we're seeing them. And and you can see here the continental shelf runs along the coast here, and most of the coastal transient sightings have been on the continental shelf. Unfortunately, in this area here, there's not a lot of vessel traffic other than the odd fishing bank out like near La Perouse Bank or Swiftsure Bank. So with group sizes, though, with transients, as I mentioned, that 4 to 5 animals is the most common group size that we see on average. And the reason why they don't have the same group size as resident killer whales is the fact that their diet, their marine mammal predominant diet, really shapes everything about their social structure. Living in a group of 4 or 5 enables transient killer whales to sneak up on vigilant marine mammal prey like seals and sea lions. We're seeing a 25 killer whales coming at a seal is going to definitely make them much more aware of the presence of the killer whales, where a small group allows for that hunting. It can also be based on energetics too as well, being able to cooperatively hunt something, then have enough food to split between individuals in a pod. Whereas resident killer whales, the groups of 25 or more animals, is usually more beneficial for trying to track salmon, especially salmon that are patchy. And having a group of 25 whales spread out across Juan de Fuca Strait enables the group to find one animal in the group to find at least a small area of salmon and communicate that to the other group. It doesn't work as well for transients that are hunting an animal such as a marine mammal prey that are very smart and intelligent. So foraging ecology. So how do we study foraging ecology? This is a harbor porpoise up in Discovery Passage near Campbell River that was being thrown through the air by a transient. How do we study killer whale diet? There's a few different ways. Most often we observe. So it's usually out on the water in a boat. We'll see a group make a kill on a harbor seal or a harbor porpoise. This is some work I was doing with Northwest Fisheries Science Center, where we were actually collecting fecal samples. So often the whales will defecate in the water, and we can collect the whale feces, and we can actually take the DNA from marine mammal prey. We get often with transients clumps of fur or what we call viscera, which are like the whiskers, or we also can get different kinds of things from the fecal sample. It also helps with genetics too as well. The stomach cells that slough off in a marine mammal and a killer whale stomach can also be found in the fecal sample. So what are we looking at the diet for the coastal population? So the majority of our predations are of harbor seal. The transients in the coastal waters here have really culturally adapted to hunting harbor seals. Now, that's not surprising, as harbor seals are also the easiest to kill. They're the most abundant marine mammal in the waters of the Pacific Northwest. Right now, the population is a steady 100 to 105,000 harbor seals, and the transient population has kind of steadily increased with the harbor seal population. And you can see here that there's an unknown. Often we come across an animal that's been basically consumed, and often it's just some tissue at the surface. We see sea lion predation being next, and harbor porpoise followed all the way down to, you can see the gray whale. It's very uncommon to see an attempted predation or a hunt, and northern elephant seal. But the populations of these species are much fewer. Humpback whales are much more difficult to hunt or kill. Humpback whales are quite large and dangerous for a transient, and we get the odd time seabirds as well. So here's a quick map showing the locations of some of the pinniped predations that we've seen, with harbor seal being the most often. Stellar sea lion or sea lion. Sometimes we can't distinguish between the California and stellar sea lion, or people that don't know the difference between the two sea lion species on the coast here. We have a general sea lion category, and then the odd elephant seal. Also with cetacean species, Dahl's porpoise. Harbor porpoise is the #1 predated species we see, and then the odd time we see the minky whale or common dolphin. So there's a few different species that we see that are been targeted by the coastal population. So this is the group size during predation events, and really it's the same consistency in numbers when we see hunts with the coastal transients. It's about 4 to 5 animals on average when we see hunts on marine mammal prey. So their main prey, as I mentioned, the Pacific harbor seal is very abundant, but the transients, when they were first kind of identified, the first catalog for transients came out, they were around 87 to 90 whales at the time in the 1980s. So the population now has grown to 350 animals. So transients, the West Coast transient, the coastal population or assemblage is doing quite well. And that has been basically kind of started to increase as the harbor seal population increased due to culling. Harbor seals were extensively culled between 1962 and 1968 by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for competition with fish stocks. Sea lions were also culled during that time. And transient numbers weren't very common. Transients weren't commonly seen, like the resident groups. Now we're seeing kind of the complete opposite. The residents have kind of left the area, and the transients are now become more resident. And that population of 350 transients down for the coastal population has kind of followed suit with the harbor seal population. Now, southern Vancouver Island, the last estimate I read was about 6,600 harbor seals. Now, transients follow the coastal transient population also follow a bit of seasonality, especially off southern Vancouver Island. During the months of between July and September, the harbor seals start to have a pupping season, and that lasts for a few months. And harbor seal pups are one of the only species that start to enter the water within the first 3 weeks of weaning with their mothers. And during that time, we see transient killer whales coming into the area of southern Vancouver Island to hunt harbor seals. And we recognize 3 kinds of foraging predominantly for harbor seal, which is haul-out foraging, near-shore foraging, and offshore foraging. Now, in this case, you can see here, this is what we call a pupping cline. So populations of harbor seal up and down the coast have different times of the year when they start to give birth to their pups. And in British, as you head north, it gets earlier in the year, especially in Southeast Alaska. And down as you go south, it gets earlier too. But right in this middle portion, it's quite a bit later than the rest of the coast. So haul-out foraging is usually described by a group of transients that kind of go near a haul-out site. So the haul-out is where harbor seals or sea lions go to rest, give birth, molt. And transients often during the pupping season in late summer will go to these sites to hunt pups. You can see a harbor seal mother and pup just off Secretary Rock. This is near Souk. This female transient was stalking. Calves often take part too as well. They'll get quite close into quite shallow water to hunt as well, and they'll circle looking for seals in the kelp beds, and sometimes seals will actually duck into small reefs or underneath the water, and the transients will find them there. This is a group of females that played decoy. They were out trying to distract a group of harbor seals, and then behind the harbor seals here was actually a male transient that was waiting and ended up getting the individual that was closest to the water here. This seal was very smart and got out of the water. This is an Oak Bay, this photograph, and the Chain Islands. So if you've done some kayaking in there, it's a great spot to actually see transients. It's a good location if you get a chance to, if you're looking for killer whales when you're kayaking, this is a great spot. This is a harbor seal pretending to be a killer whale. They're both spy hopping at the same time. I think the seal's hoping that the killer whale will forget that it's a seal and think it's a killer whale, but that did not work too well. Harbor seals are quite easily predated upon. They don't put up much of a fight. There's not a lot of energy to dealing with them like some of the larger prey like sea lions. So being able to take a harbor seal is quite a bit easier. A group of killer whales, an individual needs about a harbor seal per day, so closer to about 300 pounds a day in prey. But that's very much conservative. Often when we come across a kill site, it's not usually evident what the prey is. As I mentioned, there's a lot of unknown when we're collecting data. And you can see here, there's a bit of an oil slick on the surface. And this is you get kind of a fishy smell and a little bit of blood or oil. And that's kind of the only signs of a predation has happened. And the killers will often dive at the same location. We call this milling. And they'll mill in one location, diving and feeding on the carcass, and they'll share that animal. Other prey, like sea lions, this is off of Cortez near Powell River. You can see a group of stellar sea lions hauled out on a rock here. We were following a group of transients up near there. sea lions are much more dangerous prey. They're a lot larger. I mean, stellar sea lions in general can get up to almost 2,200 pounds. And they're very much formidable. They have large jaws. And with that, the hunts are a little bit more exciting. Harbor seals are often killed very quickly, where sea lions, it's a lot of breaching. You can see here ramming the sea lion. And then the injuries can be quite devastating. A lot of the times we witnessed stellar sea lion and California sea lion predation events. The sea lions have gotten away. They're very difficult prey. They're about twice the size of a grizzly bear. So if you think of that, and thinking of an animal like a killer whale that can actually take down a stellar sea lion is quite impressive. This animal got out of the water after a predation event we witnessed. You can see the large wounds here on the side, likely a puncture wound. We're not sure if the sea lion made it. We also see predation on small cetaceans. These are some of my favorite hunts to watch. I'm a foraging behavior specialist. I really enjoy watching, and I'm trying to understand the coordination of hunts. And this is a Pacific white-sided dolphin being thrown through the air by a transient by one of our colleagues photographed. In the Pacific Northwest waters, we have 3 species of small cetacean. Cetacean is the word for whales, dolphins, and porpoises. But we have the Pacific white-sided dolphins, harbor porpoise, and Dall's porpoise. When hunting porpoise, though, especially Dall's porpoises, is quite exciting. Dall's porpoises are actually the fastest cetacean on the planet. They can reach speeds of up to 55 kilometers per hour. Where transients are a little slower, but killer whales, but the porpoises are much more maneuverable. Here's a dolphin with some rake marks on the side. Looked like it had a close call with a group of transients. Rake marks are basically when the transients rake their teeth. But these high-speed chases often are quite acrobatic. The transients are quite aerial. They'll be breaching through the air, and the hunts can last 5 to 6 minutes. And the porpoises are zigzagging back and forth. And the killer whales play a game of cat and mouse where they'll continually chase the porpoise from behind. And once the porpoise is caught, it will often be rammed from beneath and thrown through the air. And the transients, when they ram a porpoise or a dolphin from underneath, it often causes internal bleeding, often rupturing organs or causing deep internal wounds. And during that period of time, the killer whales will just wait for the animal to die. This was an animal that we found off the west coast of Vancouver Island. Oh, sorry, this was off of Monterey, California. Sorry, it was a juvenile Dall's porpoise that was killed by a transient killer whale and left. This is a behavior we call surplus killing. They don't eat the prey that they've killed. And you can see the wound to the face is very common. The transients will grab the porpoise by the face and they'll fling it through the air. And often that could break the lower jaw, causing an arterial bleed. This porpoise actually died from a puncture wound to the lung after the necropsy we performed, where the animal ended up dying from asphyxiation, from that puncture wound, multiple broken ribs. The odd time we see the coastal transients hunting large whales. So this was off Tofino. A friend of ours, Peter Schultz, took this photograph of a group of the T-18s. And what's really interesting is the T-18s were the first transients I witnessed off of a dock in Port Hardy when I was explaining in Port Hardy. And I now know the entire match line, which are still alive today. They'll likely die out though, because there's only 2 male offspring and 2 adult females, which are post-reproductive now. But they had actually harassed this gray whale here for some time. They were attacking it, but they didn't really have the skills to deal with such large prey, and they ended up abandoning the hunt. So prey sharing is often something we see with transients. Some of these photos may get a little graphic. I apologize, but it's quite interesting. This transient brought the head of a harbor seal to us up to the side of our boat when we were doing some research, and they often will share this prey with each other. You can see the eye here, this animal's eye is looking at us. They'll take chunks of it, they'll split it between each other. They'll do a behavior called moonwalking, where the one transient will grab onto a harbor seal and another transient will grab onto a harbor seal, and then they'll back apart and they'll pull it apart. And often they'll split it that way. And some of the aerial footage now using drones, research using drones, is become quite effective. And we can now actually visually see how they kill the prey and how fast it is. And it's pretty instantaneous when they grab onto a seal. Transients have, killer whales in general, their teeth, they have about 48 teeth that interlock and they curve back a bit. So once they bite into something, it's pretty much impossible for that prey to get away. We've discovered a new form of foraging. which we're really excited to announce. It was published last year, late last year. Killer whales in the Pacific Northwest have been, we published our paper, and it's the first time we've actually witnessed intentional stranding. So if you've ever watched the BBC Blue Planet series or seen the killer whales that go up on the beaches in Argentina and South America that grab the sea lions off the beaches, it's a behavior that's never been photographed in the Pacific Northwest with mammal hunting population of killer whale. And this was the first time we witnessed it at an island near Puget Sound called Protection Island. It's a national wildlife reserve with a pretty healthy population of harbor seals, around 500 bask out on the sandy beaches here. But harbor seals prefer to rest on beaches that are haul-out sites that are quite a reef that's very hard rock or very dangerous. Transients, it's not an area that it's easy for transients to beach at, but the beach here at Protection Island is very smooth and cobble and sandy. So the transients here we witnessed them actually going right up onto the beach and trying to grab a seal, and they actually made one kill on a seal pup here. And here's Protection Island. Here's a figure from our paper, and where it happened was the bathymetry was quite shallow, within 3 to 3 meters of water. At one point, this male killer whale here, the subadult male, you can see it was kicking up a bit of the sand here to try to get off the beach. So we're pretty excited about this result. So the outer coast transients. This is what I've been doing for the last 5 years, and what I've really been passionate about is the outer coast transients. We call these the big game hunters. They're a lot different. They're part of, we're not sure if they're actually part of the West Coast population of transients, but this is something I've been trying to figure out now with my master's degree. I first noticed an outer coast transient off of Race Rocks, British Columbia in 2009. I was out on a boat and we witnessed this large male here we call can opener. He's got it kind of looks like a can opener dorsal fin, but he was with 60 transients from the coastal community. And I photographed him and I couldn't figure out who he was. And it really made me wonder. I was trying to figure out who he was, and I found out he was from actually commonly sighted off, well, not commonly sighted, but sporadically sighted off of California. And I started to just really dive into it. And then in 2011, this bottom photograph here I took, I was about 40 kilometers off of La Perouse Bank. I was a fisheries observer for Archipelago Marine Research at the time in 2011, and I was doing some fisheries work as a contractor. And I purposely took the job. It was a terrible job. You're with fishermen that don't really care for you out there because you're monitoring the situation with the fishery. But the only reason I took the job was to actually go out there and find these killer whales. And so it was the real job was counting the fish. The real job was finding the whales. The second job for me was counting the fish. And I would spend weeks and weeks out at sea trying to find these killer whales. And I started to try to photograph them. This is that male can opener, quite large. He's probably the largest killer whale that I've ever seen on the coast. He's definitely, that's quite a large whale watching vessel. So I decided to travel down to California, and I actually became the research coordinator for a nonprofit called Marine Life Studies in Monterey Bay in 2015. And every year I'd go down in the spring around March to August into summer and spring and summer, and I would look for transient killer whales down there. Right in the middle here, you can see Monterey Bay, Moss Landing, Santa Cruz. It's a spectacular region full of marine life because it's got a massive canyon system called the Monterey Submarine Canyon that comes right into the bay, right up to Moss Landing here. And it's a deep water ecosystem. So the continental shelf comes right in close to the coast off of northern and central California. So this became our study area here. And Monterey is just a spectacular place to visit if you're into marine biology and anything ocean related. We started to see these animals quite a bit offshore. This is off Kenny, California, Northern California, animals we'd never seen before that were with coastal transients off of California, which was interesting too. So killer whales often we see in British Columbia, as well as outer coast, plus animals we've never photographed or seen, and no one has seen, as far as we know from our talks with other colleagues. We've now cataloged this report that we just finished with Southwest Fisheries Science Center. We've cataloged 150 of these outer coast transients now. I analyzed, my partner, who's my partner in crime, she and I have now analyzed over 95,000 images. We've cataloged 150 outer coast transients, and we've also, and that was about 15,000 of those came from whale watchers, and then the rest came from opportunistic whale surveys, and about 2,000 of those came from Southwest Fisheries, our colleagues at Southwest Fisheries Science Center. So this is sightings of the outer coast transients. So we don't know enough about them. As far as we know, they spend most of their time out on the continental shelf, or with where deep water comes, and we're still learning about them. The populations, every year we're seeing new animals that are consistently being photo identified. So the population is likely greater than 150 whales. And you can see here there's an affiliation. They're very much most of our sightings occur along the Monterey submarine canyon. This canyon system is important for their hunting large gray whales and large marine mammals. Group size, once again, very similar. You could see to the coastal transients, about 4 to 5 animals. But we often get lone animals. These one individuals are often males that are dispersed from a family group and spend a lot of time on their own. So their diet, though, is a lot different than the coastal transients. They specifically target large whales, so gray whales in particular. And there's a big spike, two spikes we see is around March to June. We see a spike, which is coincides with the gray whale migration. So gray whales are actually making the longest migration up the coast from Baja and the lagoons of Mexico all the way up to the Bering Sea. And the transients intercept them near the canyon in Monterey. And then we also see a spike here in the fall, which we're still trying to figure out what that's from. But the diet's very different. We see several species of marine mammals in their diet: sea lion, gray whale calf, harbor seal. But you can see the sea lion and gray whale calf are two items that are definitely not that common. Harbor seal makes up a lot less of their diet, and that's because the harbor seal population off of Oregon and California is much less abundant than off of British Columbia and Washington. There's not as many. Here's predations in Monterey Bay of the different pinnipeds and seabirds and cetaceans. These are the different prey that we've seen. Some of the pinnipeds, the different pinniped predations that we've witnessed. So northern elephant seal is more in their diet as well, which is a more pelagic species. But mostly these whales specialize in hunting large whales. And you can see here's a chunk of gray whale here at the surface. This is the calf gray whale that it was just killed by a group of 30 transients. Cetacean predation, the different cetaceans, we've seen them attack humpbacks, we've seen them attack gray whales, Pacific white-sided dolphins, quite a few different species. When hunting gray whales, though, one thing we've noticed is that the transients here form these massive social groups. They will form groups of up to 25 to 30 whales. I think the largest group we have seen is 34 transients, and they will attack a gray whale calf, and the hunts can last 6 to 7 hours. And gray whale calves often are defended by their mothers, but during a hunt, if the killer whales can separate the mother, they'll often get in between the mother and calf. They'll try to split them apart, and the gray whale calves often can't keep up with the mothers. And then those transients will turn to a different kind of form where they'll end up ramming the calf repeatedly. And this is one method to break the lower jaw. Killer whales globally have a bit of a preference for the lower jaw and tongue. It's been well known from big whale predations in different parts of the world, Australia, the Antarctic, where they've killed a large whale like a blue whale or a gray whale or a humpback whale. They'll take the lower jaw and tongue. So breaking the lower jaw makes it difficult for the gray whale calf to take a breath. And often one of the things we see is blood coming out of the mouth of the gray whale. And this is a group feeding on a gray whale calf at the surface. They're going for the lower jaw just underneath. On occasion, we're lucky. Well, the whale's not lucky, but we're lucky as scientists trying to figure out what's going on, the mechanisms. We see gray whale carcasses washing up on the beach. And often these carcasses have these large rake marks. This is a picture of a rake mark from a transient. You can see the deep cuts embedded in the flesh of the gray whale. And when they eat the lower jaw, the tongue, they leave the rest. And one of the reasons that might happen, especially in Monterey and the deep water canyon, is that the gray whale carcass initially when it's killed will sink below the diving abilities of the killer whales. The deep water canyon can be thousands of meters deep, and for the transients to try to get that carcass, they have to be quick. And eating the lower jaw and the tongue is one of the softest portions of the animal, so it's a bit of a time crunch for them. But these, like I mentioned, these social groups for gray whale predations might also be an opportunity for these killer whales to get together to socialize. But it's not all the waste. Once a gray whale calf is killed, it provides thousands of kilograms of nutrients and food for benthic communities, especially in the deep water canyons where it's very much what we call oligotrophic, which is devoid of nutrients. A lot of these deep water ecosystems, animals wait for months before they can get a decent animal or a decent piece of food that might drip down from the surface. And these gray whales have been found, these large carcasses have been found with scavengers like hagfish and Pacific sleeper sharks feeding on them. So there is a transfer of energy between these ecosystems, between a pelagic ecosystem and a benthic ecosystem. This is a photograph from MBARIS, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, where they have monitored the decomposition of a gray whale calf skeleton. And you can see that some of the most interesting things on the bones of these animals are worms that have not been identified anywhere else other than on whale carcasses. So these carcasses are an important aspect to these invertebrates. We also see predations on minke whales. This is a large transient down on the outer coast that has a minke whale in its mouth. We see sea lions. And here's a small little video I'll show you of a California sea lion with an interaction with some outer coast transients. So one of the interesting things with how they feed in Monterey Bay is a new kind of foraging we're calling canyon foraging. So when they're looking for the gray whales, often the transients will stay really close to the edge of that canyon system. And when they're staying close to that canyon system, they're particularly looking for the gray whales that are crossing it. Gray whales are very much a coastal species, so they often come up the coast really close to shore. So when they cross the canyon, the transients usually ambush them. And it's the fastest way for the gray whales to get across, to get to the other side to shallow water again, is to cross the mouth of the Monterey Canyon. And the transients definitely have kind of recognized that. And we've kind of picked up the seasonality in their occurrence patterns. Outer coast group size is very similar, 5 to 6 animals during predation events, but we get the odd group of up to 25. Recently, this data spans about 2006 to 2018. And recently, last year, or in 2019, sorry, we had a report of about 34 animals in Monterey. So the differences between the outer coast and the coastal or outer coast transients we're calling, you can kind of see the differences in group size here. The number of animals between them is very similar. Prey, though, is one of the most interesting difference. There's very much a difference in the types of prey that each assemblage hunts. You can see harbor seal for the coastal transients is quite a bit there, where it's not abundant for the outer coast. Gray whale calves, another comparison here. So as I mentioned, this is something new that I haven't shared with anybody, but the Kayaking Association here is discussing a little bit about the oceanics. So this is a photograph of a oceanic mammal hunting killer whale, approximately 167 kilometers offshore of Monterey. It was a group of 4 animals that were predating a marine mammal, and you can see there was about 200 black-footed albatross feeding on or scavenging on this marine mammal. What's interesting about these whales we noticed is that their saddle patches here had interesting black marks, circular marks, which we've kind of figured out is actually the healed wounds from cookie cutter bite marks from sharks. So there's a species called a cookie cutter shark, which is a pelagic warm water species. So this is unique. Even the outer coast transients, we have not seen these bite marks on. And this cookie cutter sharks use these rasping teeth to take large chunks out of marine mammals. You can see this one with a fresh wound, this pelagic transient here, or a pelagic killer whale, sorry, with a fresh wound from a cookie cutter bite mark. And as I mentioned, these killer whales have not been seen in association with outer coastal transients or with the coastal transients. So we're not sure where they fit in, but they do look similar to the transients, and they have all been seen feeding on marine mammals in each encounter. So just to finish this off with a bit about conservation, our coastal inland waters are getting busier and busier each year. We're definitely concerned with the increase in vessel traffic, freighters coming in and out of the area. This is a group of transients that were very close to a freighter that was going probably in between, it was going up through Harrow Strait towards Vancouver. We're getting more worried about PCBs, DDTs, even though they've been banned in most of the world, they still are very persistent in the environment. That's what we call persistent organic pollutants. These pollutants bioaccumulate in upper trophic level animals like killer whales, which are eating at the top of the food chain, and they end up accumulating in the tissues. And there's been studies on harbor seals that have shown immune system disruption, and it's something that's great concern, especially for some of some with killer whales now, especially killer whales that, like the southern residents that are dealing with numerous stressors. We're getting increasingly more vessel traffic, whale watching. We all love to be out there whale watching, but getting close to killer whales is something that we all want to do. But just remembering that, especially with transients, these animals don't frequently communicate when they're hunting. They often are looking for prey using passive listening, which is listening for seals splashing in the water. They don't communicate or use vocalization similar to the resident orcas do. So often with vessel traffic noise, there's a potential, more so of a potential disturbance for killer whales in this aspect. You can see this with also interrupting predation events. There's a harbor seal sitting on the back of this fishing boat. It jumped out of the water, and the transient trying to get at it. And some of these hunts can take hours to find a seal and try to get it. So there's energy being burnt, especially with new calves in a group that need that prey. This harbor seal tried to get away from a transient, so tried to take this boat for a spin. But this is one of those interactions where the seal would not get back in the water for good reason, and unfortunately, there's a meal missed. For more information, though, if you're interested in transient killer whales, I have an email if you're interested in sending sightings. We have a Facebook page called the Transient Killer Whale Research Project, which we've got quite a following on, and we update educational things as it comes along. You can look at the UBC Institute for Oceans and Fisheries Marine Mammal Research Units. We've got NOAA. There's a couple of really great organizations that you can kind of tap into to learn more about killer whales. I just want to leave you with a little quote here. Orcas are magnificent animals that must kill in order to live. That's David Attenborough. So we're so lucky to live in an area where these beautiful animals are. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Josh. That was amazing. The amount of information you were able to pass over, and the amount of work you did to assemble it. Before you get right out of your subject there, because I think there could be some other questions. If you could look at the chat, I didn't want to interrupt you. Somebody went back. If I go back some distance here. Why do pods sometimes amalgamate for short periods of time? And I think maybe you did answer that at one point, maybe for hunting.
Sure, yeah. So sometimes you get groups of transients that will gather together, and yeah, a lot of that is for hunting purposes. Socialization, though. As transient pods get bigger, that 5 to 6 animals, and you see a female giving birth to a female, say a mother, her daughter gives birth to her own calf. Then that group sometimes will often fragment into its own matrilineal pod. So she'll become her own pod, and a young mother that's had her first calf or first 1 or 2 calves often will join with groups that for hunting purposes. So she might not be as versed as her mother was, and to learn from other groups. It's also an area for males when a pod dies out, and often with transient pods, especially if a female's had numerous male offspring. And doesn't have a successor female to carry on that lineage. You get males the pod will die out, and males will join other pods, and often not for their entire lifetime. It's for short periods of time, and that helps with hunting, mating, because especially if you're hunting larger prey like sea lions or larger whales, because a lone male transient wouldn't have that ability to hunt a more dangerous prey without the cooperation and coordination of having a group.
Okay. Of course, somebody had to ask, do they ever eat people? And why, if not, why not?
That's a great question. Because they are pretty formidable. There was a picture recently in the Oak Bay Gazette or Oak Bay Magazine or News of a diver out by Sydney that kind of popped up out of the water, and he was right behind him was a massive transient that just had dove underneath him or went around him, and I guess they got a photo. But that's something we don't really see as attacks on humans. There was a report in the 1970s of killer whale attacking a surfer off of Bigg, California, and the surgeon who did the surgery actually found that the teeth marks in the description of the animal matched a killer whale. But these animals are so intelligent in comparison to, say, a shark in many ways, that they have such complex social lives and a culture that has to be adapted. As I mentioned, all the different foraging strategies, specifically for marine mammals, takes generations. And this is one of the reasons we don't see the changing of diet with residents to eating marine mammals, is because these different killer whale populations or ecotypes have spent generations learning how to hunt this specific prey. And it takes time, and it's learning. It's all learned behavior. It's culturally transmitted. So they're used to hunting certain prey, and I don't think humans fit that description.
Well, that's good. So, and we call them, is the proper name killer whale, or where does the orca name come from and come in?
Yeah, so Orcinus orca, or, I get a lot of people go, Josh, why do you call them killer whales? That's terrible. You should call them orcas. They're orca whale. And a killer whale was coined in the 1700s from Spanish whalers that had actually witnessed killer whales predating on whales, and they called them whale killers. And then that kind of got turned around to killer whale. And they do hunt whales. They are killer whales. Like like I mentioned in that last quote here, they are top predators in an environment. So killer whale I don't have much of an issue with. Orcinus orca is a lot more ancient. It's but literally means from the realms of the dead. Orcinus, which is Greek, from the realms of the dead, or Latin, sorry, from the realms of the dead. And so it's not much better of a connotation for the name. And then you have First Nation society, Haida, called them Scana, Haida First Nations, and that means demon dolphin. So they've got a lot of different names that have been given to them over the years based on their hunting abilities.
Do they ever get injured by their prey when they're hunting?
Yeah, actually, we did witness a female. I think she was in the T-64s. I have to look, but she was surfaced one time with a broken jaw, and it does happen. The killer whales do get injured, especially tackling large marine mammals. We've seen, like any animal, top predator has to be wary, even as something as formidable as a killer whale. They do have to worry. In nature, an injury can end up resulting in death quite easily. They don't have the ability to get an antibiotic if they get a wound like we do. So being attacked by another animal and being injured, there's definitely that ability. Some whales, bowhead whale was witnessed in the 1800s, or was it the 1900s, early 1900s, was witnessed killing a killer whale that was attacking it.
Wow. And of course, should kayakers do something special when whales come close? So mostly, by the way, we just stop paddling, but.
No, I honestly just, giving them their space is great. There's not much you can do though in a kayak. In many ways, kayakers are, killer whales are very maneuverable. They can move quite quickly. They can get out of the area. So there's really, just try to give them their space as much as possible and just enjoy the view.
Yeah. That's great. Well, those were things that were in the chat. I don't know if somebody has a question they'd like to ask now. Still online? No, and then I'm going to ask you, is there something that we can do? We are people who are on the water a fair bit, and you mentioned that you welcome to sightings. And is there a way that we can sort of more, what shall I say, in a more organized way report things? Because I don't think many of us do really. Yeah,
we can send out a data sheet where we have that you can kind of share. It's mostly a lot of information we collect that we need is usually if you have photographs are really important, as I mentioned, like tracking the different pods. It's not always easy though when you're kayaking, I understand that, but we often look for latitude and longitude, some sort of location of where the whales were seen, a time. But that information is all in a very quickly, easy to use data sheet that we have available. And just emailing us that information just helps so much. It really does.
Okay, so if you can maybe give us a pointer to that, we'll certainly make it available to everybody we're connected with. That'd be wonderful.
That'd be awesome.
Sorry, I was going to say one thing that occurred to me, and I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I remember hearing it, that killer whales prefer to stun their prey rather than kind of initially, at least, sort of chow down on them. And I'm not sure why that might be, but is that the case? And is that part of the reason for flipping them or ramming them or?
Yeah, so it's especially we see with harbor seals, we have this behavior I mentioned earlier called the catapult, and it's and the why they do that almost looks like playing with them, but there's a little bit something more sinister there. They fling the seal up into the air, and when the seal lands and makes impact on the water, and often sometimes we've seen seals flung almost 80 feet into the air, and a 300-pound animal being flung 80 feet into the air is the impact is definitely going to kill the animal. So that's an option too, especially if they're trying to kill something quickly. And then like ramming a seal or sea lion, especially to try to wear it out. Sea lions especially, they'll ram and repeatedly hit that animal, and they'll try to splash it or hit it with their flukes or their tails, and that tries to debilitate or get it tired. And once the sea lion gets tired or injured, one injury, they'll wait till it drowns, and then they'll consume it after that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to ask Fred. Maybe I'll ask you first, Josh, if you could stop your sharing, then we'll be able to get the gallery view up, and we'll ask Fred if he wants to say a couple of words here for us all.
Before I thank you, Josh, I just want to mention that I'm aware of 2 human fatalities from interactions with killer whales, and one happened here in Victoria and the other one in San Diego. Well, those were both whales in captivity. Could you comment on those, please?
Yeah, sure. So captivity is a bit of a different situation. Sorry, I should have mentioned captivity. That's definitely happened. I mean, one animal in particular was quite notorious for that. I think it's the only animal actually that's been notorious for that was Tilikum. And Tilikum was an Icelandic killer whale, so he was what we call a type 1 killer whale. And then he was captured, brought to Sealand of the Pacific. He made his first kill, it was in 1996, 96 or 97, and he made his first kill on someone, and it was really unfortunate. I don't know if anybody's gotten to watch the movie Blackfish. It's a documentary. Mm-hmm. He was kept quite in close quarters with other killer whales and female killer whales, which can be a problem. As remember, I mentioned it's a matrilineal society. Females show a lot of dominance over males. And I think when they kept him, because the owner at the time was afraid that someone was going to come release the orcas, because they released the transients in Pedder Bay at that time. They were really scared someone's going to come do that again. So they kept them in these little makeshift pens, these pens, and they ended up. He was pretty much driven nuts. Is how I'd say. He went a little crazy. I think as an animal that is so social, taken from his pod in with a group of killer whales that weren't even the same ecotype as he was. At the time, we didn't know killer whales were transient resident. They were just starting to learn that, and being put together with these other killer whales really wasn't, they probably don't even speak the same language. And he was beat up upon. And after he made his first kill, he was sent off to SeaWorld. And he then killed a homeless man that decided to want to swim with the killer whales in the middle of the night. And then he killed that trainer, the final trainer he killed. He was kept away from people. That was an unfortunate incident with that trainer, because he had killed twice, and she shouldn't have been even where she was in the water with him.
Thank you. I want to thank you for a very interesting, well put together and stimulating presentation. I certainly learned an awful lot about killer whales that I didn't know. So thank you very much. Are you based in Victoria or Vancouver? Where do you live?
Victoria right now. And then I'll be in Vancouver, possibly this September with COVID restrictions that are starting to come.
The reason I'm asking, well, you can't see it because it disappears in and out. Let me pull back. As a way of thanking our presenters, we give them the much sought after, personalized, engraved Siska mug. So
Oh.
I'll send you an email and get your address and drop it off at your place here in town in the next couple of days. So
Oh.
Josh, it was a real pleasure to listen to you tonight. Thank you very much.
And thank you all. I really appreciate
Yeah, very
you guys taking the time. It was a real pleasure.
We've got, I think Alan can
Thank you.
correct me
I
if
just
I'm
one
wrong.
question has come up. Sorry,
Alan, we've got 2 more meetings.
ahead,
correct,
Fred.
this year?
Yes, Alan's trying to say something and it's not coming through.
Yeah, you mean in the year?
Right. I was just going to
You
mention.
mean
that
our
we-
April and May?
Right. We've got our speakers, I'm pretty sure, lined up for both those months. And information will be available in a newsletter and in the emails going out. So back to you, Alan.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Fred. Just one further question, which might bear on what you send us. Somebody's asking about the whale report app, Josh. Is that something you're familiar with? And would that work to get information to you, or do you prefer a different style?
Yeah, the whale report app, we're not involved with that. We do a different style because we collect certain kinds of data that might be different, especially if we're working on any sort of publication. So we kind of have a different report than that. That's usually, I think the whale report app's with the BC Cetacean Sightings Network, which is a great organization to send reports to as well. But when our data sheets, reports that we have, we're specifically looking for particular details of variables that we're trying to collect. So it's a little bit different.
Okay, good, thank you. So I know that we've very much enjoyed your presentation, but for those who are just have and I'll turn to Debbie and Rob.
You're fading out, Alan.
Yes.